The Prison Break Mastermind, Clyde's Ultimate Revenge. Cinematic opening. That freezing January morning in 1934, I witnessed the most audacious prison break in American history. January 16th, dawn barely breaking over the Texas countryside, fog rolling across the prison fields like smoke from a battlefield. What I saw that day wasn't just a rescue operation. It was pure vengeance. 2 years in the making, executed with the precision of a military strike. Because I was there when Clyde Barrow returned to the place that had broken him and transformed him into America's most wanted criminal. Eastham Prison Farm, the hell on earth that had turned a petty car thief into a cold-blooded killer. The place he'd sworn to destroy from the moment he walked out those gates. Nobody could have predicted that this 24-year-old outlaw would orchestrate the most spectacular prison break in Texas history. But then again, nobody understood the depths of Clyde Barrow's hatred for the system that had brutalized him. Until that morning, when his masterpiece of revenge played out in blood and gunfire across the prison fields. Eastham Prison Farm in 1934 was America's vision of hell on earth. Located in the piney woods of East Texas, 40 miles north of Huntsville, it sprawled across 12,000 acres of cotton fields, vegetable crops, and human misery. Built in 1917 as Texas's first maximum security facility, Eastham had earned a reputation as the most brutal prison in the most brutal prison system in America. The guards called it the Ham. The prisoners had other names for it, none of them printable in newspapers. This was where Texas sent its hardest criminals, and where those criminals either broke completely or became something far worse than when they'd arrived. The work was backbreaking, clearing timber, picking cotton, building roads under the merciless Texas sun. The guards were sadistic, the conditions inhuman, and escape was considered impossible. Clyde Barrow had learned all this firsthand during his 20-month sentence from April 1930 to February 1932. He'd gone in as a 20-year-old car thief with a juvenile record. He'd come out as something else entirely, a hardened killer with an unquenchable thirst for revenge against the Texas prison system. What happened to Clyde at Eastham had been whispered about in the cells, but never spoken aloud in the outside world. The sexual assaults by a dominant inmate known as Big Ed Crowder, the months of terror and humiliation, the night Clyde had finally snapped and caved in Crowder's skull with a lead pipe, committing his first murder in self-defense. The brutal beatings from guards who considered prisoner rape an acceptable form of prison discipline. Other inmates who'd known Clyde before and after said the change was complete. The schoolboy who'd entered Eastham emerged as what one convict called a rattlesnake with a grudge. Prison officials noted his transformation but attributed it to normal criminal hardening. They had no idea they'd created something far more dangerous. A man with the intelligence to plan complex operations and the ruthlessness to execute them without mercy. From the moment of his release in February 1932, Clyde had talked obsessively about returning to Eastham, not as a prisoner, but as an avenging angel who would storm the prison, kill every guard who'd wronged him, and free every convict trapped in that hell. His friends thought he was fantasizing. His family hoped he'd forget. Only Bonnie Parker understood that Clyde's dreams of revenge weren't fantasies, they were blueprints. By January 1934, Clyde had assembled the resources necessary to make those blueprints reality. He had military-grade weapons stolen from National Guard armories. He had loyal gang members willing to die for him. He had detailed inside knowledge of prison routines and security procedures. And most importantly, he had Raymond Hamilton, his former partner and current rival, locked up inside Eastham, serving 266 years for armed robbery and murder. The convergence of revenge and rescue created the perfect storm that would make January 16, 1934, one of the bloodiest days in Texas prison history. The plan takes shape. The seeds of the Eastham raid were planted in December 1933, when Raymond Hamilton was captured and sentenced to what amounted to life imprisonment. Hamilton had been Clyde's partner during some of their most successful robberies in 1932, but their relationship had soured over money, leadership, and Hamilton's reckless behavior. By late 1933, they were barely speaking. But Raymond's imprisonment at Eastham changed everything. Despite their personal animosity, Clyde couldn't abandon his former partner to the horrors he'd experienced there. More importantly, Raymond's desperation made him the perfect inside man for the prison break Clyde had been planning for 2 years. The connection came through Jimmy Mullins, a 48-year-old career criminal finishing a burglary sentence at Eastham. Mullins bunked next to Raymond in the dormitory and had known Clyde during his original imprisonment. Raymond, facing the prospect of dying in prison, offered Mullins $1,000 to contact Clyde and arrange a weapons drop for a mass escape. When Mullins was released on January 10, 1934, he went immediately to West Dallas to find Floyd Hamilton, Raymond's older brother. Floyd had maintained a clean record, but family loyalty compelled him to help his imprisoned brother. That same day, Floyd brought Mullins to meet with Bonnie and Clyde at a prearranged location. Clyde's reaction to seeing Mullins was immediate suspicion. He remembered Mullins as an unreliable drug addict and potential informant, exactly the kind of prisoner who might set a trap for escaping inmates. The meeting grew tense as Clyde questioned Mullins about prison, security, guard schedules, and the proposed escape route. "I don't trust you," Clyde told Mullins bluntly. "You were a stool pigeon in prison, and stool pigeons don't change." Mullins protested his innocence, but Clyde remained skeptical. Finally, he agreed to help with the prison break, but only if Mullins participated personally in planting the weapons. "If this is a trap, you'll be caught in it with us," Clyde said. "If it's legitimate, you'll prove it by taking the same risks." Floyd Hamilton volunteered to help with the weapons drop, understanding that his brother's life depended on the success of the operation. On the evening of January 13th, Floyd and a terrified Mullins cut through the barbed wire perimeter around Eastham's Camp 1 and hid 2 Colt .45 automatic pistols with ammunition clips inside an old inner tube beneath a drainage culvert near the prison workfields. The weapons cache was discovered exactly where they'd placed it the next morning, confirming that the inside information was accurate. Clyde spent the following day positioning himself and his team for the assault, while Raymond and fellow inmate Joe Palmer prepared their fellow prisoners for the breakout. By dawn on January 16th, all the pieces were in place for what would become known as the Eastham breakout, the most audacious prison raid in American history. 20 minutes that changed everything. The morning of January 16th, 1934, dawned cold and foggy across East Texas. Temperatures had dropped to near freezing during the night, and a thick mist hung over the Eastham prison fields like a shroud. Perfect weather for what Clyde had planned. At 6:30 a.m., the prison work crews began assembling for their daily labor assignments. Due to staff shortages, 2 separate work groups had been combined into a single, larger crew of 43 prisoners, all destined for the timber clearing operation in the South Fields. Among them were Raymond Hamilton and Joe Palmer, both armed with the .45 automatics hidden 3 days earlier. The guard detail consisted of 6 men, 4 guards with shotguns, forming the traditional shotgun ring around the prisoners, 1 supervisor overseeing the work assignment, and 1 long-arm man, a guard on horseback positioned 200 yards away with a high-powered rifle, ready to shoot down any prisoner who broke through the perimeter. Major Joe Crowson, a veteran guard with 15 years' experience, served as the long-arm man that morning. He was mounted on his usual horse, carrying his Winchester rifle, positioned on a slight rise overlooking the work area. From his vantage point, Crowson could see the entire operation, the prisoners spreading out to clear brush, the guards maintaining their positions, and the fog-shrouded fields stretching toward the prison compound. What Crowson couldn't see was Clyde Barrow and Jimmy Mullins, hidden in a grove of pine trees 300 yards beyond the work area, armed with a Thompson, submachine gun, and additional automatic weapons. They'd been in position since before dawn, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At 7:15 a.m., Clyde made his move. The attack began with Raymond Hamilton's signal. He simply stopped working and stood up straight, looking toward the tree line where he knew Clyde was waiting. Joe Palmer followed suit, then began moving casually toward the nearest guard, as if asking a question about the work assignment. When Palmer was within arm's reach, he drew his .45 and put it against the guard's throat. "Don't move," Palmer said quietly. "Don't make a sound." The other guards, scattered around the 43 prisoners, realized something was wrong but couldn't immediately identify the threat. Prisoners outnumbered guards by more than 7-1, and in the fog and confusion, it was difficult to distinguish between normal work activity and coordinated resistance. That's when Clyde opened fire from the tree line. The Thompson submachine gun shattered across the morning air, sending .45 caliber bullets into the ground around the guards' feet. Clyde wasn't trying to kill the guards yet. He was creating chaos, forcing them to take cover, disrupting their ability to coordinate a response. "Everybody down," he shouted. "Guards, drop your weapons." Major Crowson, from his position on horseback, had the clearest view of what was happening. He saw the muzzle flashes from the tree line, saw prisoners scattering in all directions, saw his fellow guards diving for cover behind whatever shelter they could find. He raised his Winchester and tried to locate targets in the fog. That's when Joe Palmer shot him. Palmer had acquired one of the dropped guard shotguns and sent a blast of buckshot into Crowson's chest. The major fell from his horse, mortally wounded but still alive, trying to crawl toward better cover while blood soaked through his prison-issue uniform shirt. Clyde and Mullins emerged from the trees, advancing on, the prison work detail with military precision. Clyde carried the Thompson while Mullins had a shotgun, and both men moved like experienced soldiers rather than desperate criminals. They'd planned this assault for weeks, studying guard positions, timing their approach, coordinating their fire zones. "Hamilton, Palmer," Clyde shouted, "move." Raymond Hamilton and Joe Palmer began herding specific prisoners toward Clyde's position. Not all 43 inmates, but 5 carefully selected men who'd been chosen weeks earlier for their loyalty, their criminal skills, and their willingness to follow orders without question. The other prisoners scattered into the fog, some trying to help their escaping comrades, others simply trying to avoid the gunfire. The remaining guards, outnumbered and outgunned, retreated toward the prison compound, firing wildly as they ran. Their shotguns were no match for Clyde's Thompson at anything beyond close range, and the fog made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Within 20 minutes of the first shot, Clyde Barrow had accomplished something that prison officials had declared impossible: a successful mass escape from Eastham Prison Farm. 5 prisoners climbed into Clyde's waiting Ford V8 sedan: Raymond Hamilton, Joe Palmer, Henry Methvin, Hilton Bybee, and one other convict whose name would never appear in official records. Behind them, Major Joe Crowson lay dying in the prison field, the first law enforcement officer killed in what would become Clyde's final, bloodiest campaign. As they drove away from the prison, Clyde looked back at the fog-shrouded fields where he'd been broken and rebuilt as a killer. His 2-year obsession with revenge was finally satisfied. He'd struck back at the system that had destroyed his humanity and created the monster he'd become. But victory came with a price that would ultimately destroy him. Consequences of revenge. The Eastham breakout sent shockwaves through the Texas criminal justice system and the national law enforcement community. Never before had a civilian criminal organization successfully assaulted a maximum security prison and extracted multiple inmates through military-style tactics. The raid demonstrated a level of planning, coordination, and firepower that elevated Bonnie and Clyde from regional outlaws to national security threats. Major Joe Crowson died in the prison hospital 3 days after the assault, making the breakout officially a cop killing that demanded the full attention of state and federal authorities. Colonel Lee Simmons, general manager of the Texas prison system, was personally humiliated by the successful attack on his flagship facility. He immediately fired 2 guards who'd fled during the assault and made a public promise that would haunt the remaining months of Bonnie and Clyde's lives. Standing over the dying Major Crowson, Simmons reportedly said, "Those fellows had their day. We'll have ours. I promise I won't let them get away with it." Within 24 hours,